EECMS, your virtual employment equity compliance management service.
Good morning, everyone. Again, from our side, thank you very much for joining this webinar pertaining to disabilities and the summary of the Employment Equity Act and some of the proposed amendment bills. So just to again introduce ourselves, my name is Pieter. I'm from a company called EECMS, a company dealing in employment equity and ensuring that all our clients and companies in South Africa are in total and full employment equity compliance. Okay, so from our side, we are here in our studios in Pretoria East on this lekker, cloudy Thursday morning. Very welcome to everyone. The itinerary is as follows. I'm going to hand over to Mr. Ari, who will have a lekker discussion with all the delegates pertaining to disabilities. And then we will take a full 5-minute break, just about 12 o'clock, after which we will return back and then we will have a discussion on the summary of the Employment Equity Act. Okay, so again, from our side, 80 delegates here. Thank you very much for attending. Ari, I will hand over to you. Thanks a lot for your time this morning as well.
Good morning, goeiemorgen, dumela, sawubona. It's a great privilege, Pieter. Thank you for inviting me to address your clients and your colleagues. It's quite significant that today is International Day for People with Disabilities, and I will expand a little bit on that. So thank you for giving us, people with disabilities, your time today. We celebrate, we don't commiserate, and I'll explain why. On the 30th of August 1985, I was 23 years old. That was 35 years ago. I stood at the edge at the top of a diving board and looked down at a swimming pool 20 meters below me. I had been hired as a model to model for a television commercial that was making a commercial on a water park. And I knew something wasn't right. I had dived 15 times during the day. When I stood there, something was different. Little did I know that someone had drained the water out of the swimming pool in a 3-hour lunch break that they gave us. And I dived, and literally 5 meters before I hit the water, I realized the water was only less than a meter deep. And I hit my head on the bottom of the pool and I broke my neck. My life changed, and I realized that to cope, I had to change. I was whisked off to Addington Hospital in Durban, where I spent 6 months in rehabilitation. And there were 3 very significant things that happened to me in this time. The first was obviously a visit from the surgeon after having come out of intensive care, and the doctor came to me and said to me, you are quadriplegic. Well, I couldn't even spell the word. I didn't even know what it meant. And then he said, you won't be able to do this, and you won't be able to do that, and you can't do this, and you'll never do that. And those were shocking things to hear. And then an occupational therapist soon thereafter came to me and said, you're going to be using a wheelchair for the rest of your life. Now, that's not something that anybody wants to hear. And she said, you won't be able to go here, and you won't be able to go there, and you won't be able to do this, and you won't be able to do that. And I decided soon thereafter that I will tell quadriplegia what it's got to cope with, and I will tell my wheelchair where it needs to go. And those were 2 very significant things that I made my mind up about. With the right wheelchair in an accessible environment, I can go anywhere. I'm not bound or confined. With the right approach to my disability, if I don't look at it as a disability that disables me, if I look at it as rather just a health condition, then quadriplegia's got to deal with where I want to go and the things that I want to achieve. Keeping in mind, remember, I was 23 at the time. I then also had hundreds of visitors who just gave me love and visits and time and support, and I realized that wasn't helping my rehabilitation. So I sort of called a meeting with everybody that was visiting me regularly and said, amortize this time that you visit me over the next 30, 40 years, because I'm going to need you. This is going to be a long journey. And so stop visiting me now and break it up into small chunks of maybe 2 days here every year or every week or every month. And so I still engage with those friends and family of mine. And it's now 35 years since my accident. After I came home, discharged from hospital, rehabilitated, I finished my Institute of Marketing Management diploma. And I realized that with limited use of my hands and fingers and very little movement of my body, I would need to get some additional skills. So I thought carefully, and I learned how to speed read. That means that at reading at 1,000 words a minute, I can read an average size book in about half an hour to 40 minutes. Very powerful. I then also learned voice-activated software, and I can type 100 words a minute. So I developed the ability to get information into my head very quickly. That's being able to speed read, and then take it out of my head onto some paper or into a software program very fast as well through voice-activated software. A very valuable skill to have. I went into a small business, a signage company, and at the same time also invested in some sort of, call it parallel income, in the form of, I had a frozen yogurt franchise with a friend of mine. We then opened a little bakery, and then we opened another ice cream shop. So we made lots of money in the frozen yogurt. Then we lost it all in the bakery. Then we made it back in the ice cream shop. And this gave me the experience and the confidence to be able to circulate and to earn and to understand what it's like to be employed and to be self-employed and to be an entrepreneur. I climbed the ranks in the disability sector and eventually was appointed as the CEO of QASA, the Quad Para Association of South Africa. And I have been the CEO for 20 years, and I retired a year ago. The tempo was hectic. To consider me being a quadriplegic, I was traveling 20 nights a month away from home. I was almost obsessed by this job, and our significance in the NPO sector was that we were very good in compliance, in sustainability, and lobby and advocacy. We were always leading disability issue. Some of the things that I really enjoyed was I was the World Spinal Cord Injury Ambassador and was appointed to be the President's Advisor on Disability. I still am. I serve on the Presidential Working Group on Disability. And just to let you know, as I speak to you now, the disability sector is engaging using Teams with the President right now until 12 o'clock. So when I finish chatting to you, I'll jump off here and I will join the engagement with the President. I say all of this because just to give you a little bit of a background about who I am and where I've come from. And it's a great pleasure for me to be able to share my presentation with you. I'm going to talk to you about the tools and understanding you need for successful integration of persons with disabilities in the workplace and value proposition. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I've got 24 slides. Some are technical, which I think are important, but I'm not going to confuse you too much. I'm going to hopefully make this subject look very easy. The last slide will have my contact details, my mobile and my email. You email me and I'll email you this presentation, plus some of the additions that I'll refer to during my talk with pleasure. If you want to ask a question, I can't see your hands going up because I've got my presentation in front of me, but I will allow questions at the end of my presentation if you're comfortable with that. And I'm very willing to share any questions you have on email afterwards, or if you want to give me a call, for the purpose of understanding there's a huge value proposition. And it's not difficult to integrate people with disabilities in the workplace. So that's what I'm trying to achieve on this, the 3rd of December, International Day of People with Disabilities. So here goes. I'll just show you quickly so that you see this is, I told you my story. The picture on the left is the last photograph taken of me standing. The middle picture was, I spent a lot of time with Christopher Reeve, the former Superman, if you can remember him. I used to go to New York to visit him, and we had a great friendship and relationship. And then my favorite hobby is doing some fly fishing. So now, as we all see each other on the Zoom screen, this is proof that I am actually a wheelchair user. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about what we're going to chat about today. I'm going to quickly inform you that it's Disability Rights Awareness Month right now, and in fact today is the culmination of Disability Rights Awareness Month, which is called DRAM. So I think it's important for you just to understand what that all means in the disability sector. I'm going to talk about the definition of disability. So who qualifies? I'm going to refer to the Technical Assistance Guideline and the Code of Good Practice. I'm going to talk about reasonable accommodation, give you some tips and some treats. I'm going to refer to the important pieces of legislation that you should understand or listen, or parts thereof, to do with the disability sector and people with disabilities. I'll talk about terminology, so show you how to get terminology right. The value proposition of people with disabilities. And I think that with COVID-19, there's a new opportunity for people with disabilities to get in the workplace, and I'll break that down and explain it. So just to quickly tell you about Disability Rights Awareness Month. In this November, December, the theme for this year was Together Building an Empowered South Africa, Inclusive of Disability Rights. And there were a number of sort of work streams revolving around that. Rebuilding an economy accessible to all persons with disabilities. Rebuilding responsive disaster management strategy that places persons with disabilities at the center. This came about as a result of COVID-19, obviously. Accelerating inclusive learning environments for persons with disabilities at all levels, and creating an accessible justice system that seeks to address the risk of compounded marginalization and assisted decision-making legal framework. I'm reiterating again, through Pieter and myself, I will make these slides available to you, and once you've heard my talk, then going through these slides, I'm hopefully it will all fall into place. So I'm going to keep it simple and keep it interesting. So let's start with the definition of disability. The formal definition of disability that you as employers and in HR departments should embrace comes from, it's in the Code of Good Practice, and it comes out of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, Article 1. Persons with disabilities, that's important to know that. Persons with disabilities, that's how we like to be referred as. Include those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. That is the definition that belongs to people with disabilities, that's been adopted by government through Parliament and exists in the Code of Good Practice, and it comes out of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. Use that. The Employment Equity Act talks to people who have a long-term or recurring physical or mental impairment which substantially limits their prospects of entry into or advancement in employment. I'm sure you all know that off by heart now, being in the employment equity space. What it doesn't refer to is the barriers that may hinder their full and effective participation in society. And now I'll explain what I mean by that. So, disability is an experience that arises out of the interaction between a person with a health condition and the context within which they live. That's simply explained. So I, as a wheelchair user, if I live in an urban area where the roads are accessible, the pavements are accessible, there's scoops, the buildings around me have got lifts and toilets, the the terrain is relatively level. I've got a decent wheelchair. I suffer disability much less. I am far less disabled than someone in an informal area, a township area, with a wheelchair that's not very strong and not appropriate to that terrain. No ramps, lots of stairs, no lifts, no toilet facilities. They are far more disabled than I am. And so we must appreciate that it's an experience that arises out of the interaction between a person with a health condition, which we're not going to change, and the context within which they live, which we can change in a number of ways. Just to tell you, there's another definition or a reference to disability when it comes to SARS, and they talk about the term disability is defined in section 18.3 of the SARS Act as follows. It means a moderate to severe limitation of a person's ability to perform, to function or perform daily activities as a result of a physical, sensory, communication, intellectual, mental impairment, if the limitation has lasted or has a prognosis of lasting more than a year and is diagnosed by a duly registered medical practitioner in accordance with criteria prescribed by the Commissioner. So SARS has a completely different view on what their definition of disability is, because of course they know that there's SARS legislation that allows you as a person with a disability to claim all of your expenses pertaining to your disability. You can claim back from your taxable income. And that's important for you to share this information with people with disabilities that are working in your work environment, that there is a benefit. One of the few benefits of being a person with a disability is that you do get some tax relief. So who qualifies? According to the Employment Equity Act, you must have an impairment. It must be long-term and recurring, and it must be substantially limiting. According to the Department of Social Development disability grant, and just to let you know, the disability grant is 1,860 Rand. You need a medical report and a functional assessment report, which is done by a medical practitioner recognized by SASSA, confirming your disability. So they have a different process. The Employment Equity Act asks you, do you have an impairment? Is it long-term and recurring? And is it substantially limiting? Of course, remember, back to the definition, substantially limiting might just be the area that I live in, or the equipment that I have or that I don't have, that's good enough or not good enough. And then with SARS, you need to complete a SARS ITR-DD form with a medical practitioner. If you have completed form and you sign it, and with a medical practitioner, you then declare that you're a person with a disability. And another benefit is that if you are in a high tax paying bracket as a person with a disability, you can get a tax directive by applying with IRP 3B form to SARS, which means you pay a much reduced tax because they know at the end of the tax year, you'll probably claim back all your expenses. Just something interesting, and I know there might be questions, first of all, before I go on to wheelchair parking, which is just sort of a real irritant of wheelchair users, is a lot of you might say, yes, but what about this? And does that person qualify? Does someone with bipolar? Does someone with autism? You're quite happy to put that in the message box, and I'll talk about it at the end of our discussion today. But let me quickly tell you who qualifies for wheelchair parking, because it's something that really irritates wheelchair users. And it's very simple. There's no gray area. If you are a wheelchair user, you use the wheelchair parking. If you have crutches or calipers or an amputation, or you're blind or cannot hear, you don't qualify to use the wheelchair parking. It's 3.5 meters wide for the purpose that they want a wheelchair user to be able to exit or enter a vehicle from either side of the vehicle. So the Quad Para Association of South Africa is quite clear, and wheelchair users will argue. It's very simple. The sign depicts a wheelchair, nothing else, and we would like everybody to acknowledge that those bays must be reserved for wheelchair users. So I thought I'd have that little punt in for wheelchair users. Okay, let's talk about the Technical Assistance Guideline. I'm not going to go through it. It's 96 pages, but as part of an email service I'll provide, and Pieter can as well, if you don't have the TAG, you should have it. It's a great, great document. I can email it to you with this presentation. So the point of the Technical Assistance Guideline is to assist employers and employees with expertise on disability and understanding the Employment Equity Act. Disability must be seen as a social model, not a medical model. So what I'm saying is that you need to make sure that people's attitudes to the Technical Assistance Guidelines accept people with disabilities. You need to make a shift in the way you think about people with disabilities. And people with disabilities do not want to be seen as a medic in the medical model sense. We don't want to be diagnosed, and we don't want to be fixed or cured. We are who we are. We have this medical condition. We want you to change your attitude to and allow us to integrate into mainstream society. The guideline also assists you to eliminate unfair discrimination, to understand the opportunities and practical ways of integration. It gives understanding to rights and reasonable accommodation for persons with disabilities. So I am going to talk about reasonable accommodation, but there are pages and pages of technical information in this Technical Assistance Guideline, which is very useful. It helps you to understand the relationship between the Act, the Code, and the Technical Assistance Guideline, because the Code has a different purpose to the Technical Assistance Guideline. Then the Code of Good Practice and the Technical Assistance Guideline form the basis for the implementation of the Act. If you just want to understand what's the purpose of them. The Technical Assistance Guideline is a practical guide and advice, and the article in the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities that is specific to this subject is Article 27 on work and employment, and I have got a slide on that. So guys, use the Technical Assistance Guideline. It breaks it down and makes it easy if you want to understand how to implement the Employment Equity Act when it comes to the designated group of people with disabilities. The Code of Good Practice, which was brought in 2005, provides guidelines on the elimination of unfair discrimination and implementation of employment equity. It gives guidelines for employers' HR policies and practices that must be non-discriminatory and reflect employment equity principles. It applies to all employers and employees and must be read in conjunction with the Employment Equity Act and other acts. And I'll show you some of the other acts that are useful to understand. So the Code of Good Practice has Part A, which is dealing with commencing employment, including the interview, the placing of adverts. It talks Part B to during employment, gives you the guidelines of how to implement during employment, and Part C is ending employment. And then those three, Part A, B, and C, are broken down into scope, impact of employment equity, policy, and key links to other topics in the Code of Good Practice. So if you want to know what's the good practice all about, there are the points for you to understand before you open the first page of it, what the purpose of this is. Okay, so let's talk about reasonable accommodation. I'm sure all of you have had this drummed into you, and some understand and some don't, and there's always some unanswered questions. Defining reasonable accommodation according to the Employment Equity Act is any modification of an adjustment to a job or working environment, an adjustment to a job or working environment that will enable a person from a designated group to have access to, participate in, or advance in their employment. A reasonable accommodation is assistance or changes to a position or workplace that will enable an employee to do his or her job despite having a disability. And under the Employment Equity Act, employers are required to provide reasonable accommodations to qualified employees with disabilities, unless doing so would pose an undue hardship. Remember, qualified employees, which means if you don't declare your disability, then you can't expect reasonable accommodation. When is an employer obliged to make reasonable accommodation? People with disabilities must disclose their disability and what they need in terms of accommodation, and when such a need is reasonably self-evident to the employer. So when people with disabilities disclose their disability and need reasonable accommodation, and when such a need is reasonably self-evident to the employer. Employers may adopt the most cost-effective means that are consistent with removing barriers to a person being able to perform the job and have equal access to benefits. So what does that mean in some practical examples? Adapting existing equipment or acquiring suitable equipment, reorganizing workstations, changing training and assessment systems, restructuring jobs so non-essential functions are reassigned, adjusting working time and leave, providing sign language interpreters, providing specialized support. I'm going to come back to providing sign language interpreters. Let me get through unjustifiable hardship. An employer may plead unjustifiable hardship on the business. Unjustifiable hardship is action that requires significant or considerably difficult or expense that would substantially harm the viability of the enterprise. Obviously, this involves considering the effectiveness of the accommodation and the extent to which it would seriously disrupt the operation of the business. So let's talk about sign language interpreters. I don't believe it's expected of an employer that if they employ someone who is deaf or hard of hearing, that they need to employ a sign language interpreter in order to allow them to do their job. If there is a staff meeting or a training session of all the staff, then of course you need sign language interpreters. But if the deaf person get on with their job as they can, and they will, and then when it comes to communal communication, you can train some of your fellow staff members, incentivize them to learn sign language interpreting, and ask them to perform that duty when you have a staff meeting or when you have team building or engagement with your staff in a joint environment. I hope that helps as tips and treats. Okay, legislation. I don't want to bore you, but let me rush through this legislation, and you'll get my slides and you can go and refer to it. But it can get quite technical. The legislation that you really need to refer to is obviously the Constitution, the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act. The acronym is PEPUDA. We know it as the Equality Act. Obviously, the Employment Equity Act. And then, of course, National Building Regulations and Building Standards. And that the part of the National Building Regulations and Building Standards that you really must have a copy of, and it deals with accessibility and access, is Part S 10400. Then, of course, disability rights came out of the Integrated National Disability Strategy, and that then got converted into the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, and that document has now been integrated into, and the paper, the document that people with disabilities will use as their reference point is the white paper on the rights of people with disabilities. And that came out in December 2015. The white paper on the rights of people with disabilities is the document that has the 9 pillars that explain what people with disabilities feel their rights are or should be. And there is a discussion, and in fact, it's going to happen right now, today, with the President. The disability sector is calling for a Disability Act, hopefully in 2021, because, in fact, the UN Convention is not a law. It's actually a guideline. The white paper on the rights of people with disabilities is more of a request. You can't get a fine. There's no legislation that we can pull up against you if you don't comply with the 9 pillars of the white paper. And so a Disability Act will offer the same strength that the Equality Act offers for people with disabilities. Quickly, in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, Chapter 2 of the Constitution, paragraph 9, and what you really need to just take note of is what I've highlighted in red. The state may not unfairly discriminate directly or indirectly against anyone on one or more grounds, including race, gender, sex, pregnancy, marital status, ethnic or social origin, color, sexual orientation, age, disability, religion, conscience, belief, culture, language, and birth. So that's where we come in the Bill of Rights, Chapter 2, disability. In the Equality Act, Chapter 2, Section 6, Section 9, subject to Section 6, no person may unfairly discriminate against any person on the ground of disability, including denying or removing from any person who has a disability any supporting or enabling facility necessary for their functioning in society. Contravening the code of practice or regulations of the South African Bureau of Standards that govern environmental accessibility, and failure to eliminate obstacles that unfairly limit or restrict persons with disabilities from enjoying equal opportunities, or failing to take steps to reasonably accommodate the needs of such persons. So guys, the Equality Act is very powerful for people with disabilities. Please take note of this. National Building Regulations, Part S, 10400, Facilities for Persons with Disabilities. In any building contemplated in Regulation S1 requiring facilities for persons with disabilities shall be able to safely enter the building, use all the facilities subject to the provisions under Sub-Regulation 3 within it, and leave it. There shall be a means of access suitable for use by persons with disabilities from the main and auxiliary approaches of the building to the ground story via the main entrance and any secondary entrance. Guys, so often the wheelchair access is, oh, it's round the back. It can't be round the back anymore. It's got to be via the main entrance. There shall be a means of egress suitable for use by persons with disabilities from any point in a building to a place of safety in the event of an emergency. So as much as we've spent all these years getting people with disabilities into buildings, we now have to have a safe way of getting people with disabilities out of buildings in the case of an emergency. The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which I referred you to. I'm just quickly going to go over the parts in red. Article 9, accessibility, is a very powerful article. There are 50 articles in the UN Convention, but I'll only refer to 2 today, and that is to enable, accessibility doesn't only talk about ramps and toilets. It's to enable persons with disabilities to live independently and participate in all aspects of life. Physical environment, to transportation, to information and communication, including information and communication technologies and systems. And of course, these measures shall include the identification and elimination of obstacles and barriers to accessibility. So the parts in red are important. The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Article 27, work and employment. State parties recognize the right of persons with disabilities to work on an equal basis with others. Very, very important. Okay, so the white paper on the rights of persons with disabilities which was approved by Cabinet on the 9th of December 2015, has got 9 pillars, and that has integrated the 50 articles from the UN Convention have been brought into the 9 pillars in the white paper, and there they are listed below. Removing barriers to access and participation. I'm not going to read each and every one of them out, but there they are in front of you. And of course, if you request, you'll get this presentation and you'll have them, and then you can, when you get the white paper on the rights of persons with disabilities. In fact, if you want me to email you the white paper, I'll do that as an attachment as well. It'll be a useful document for you to have. Thank goodness we've got past the legislation part, which is boring, but extremely, extremely important. So let's talk about terminology, get it right. And so I'm referring to this as myths, manners, do's, and don'ts. Words are powerful as they convey attitudes and can have a positive or negative impact depending on how they're used. When referring to someone who has a disability, always refer to the person first, then the disability. So you can say, there's a person using a wheelchair or a person with a disability. Always refer to the person first, then the disability, and you'll never get it wrong. We are people with disabilities. We own our disabilities. They do not own us. We are not living with disabilities. You don't sort of give notice to your disability and then at the end of the 30 days notice, your disability goes. No. We are people with disabilities. We own our disabilities. Never refer to a person's disability unless it's relevant. Treat people as individuals, not conditions, with their own mixture of abilities and disabilities. Do not make assumptions about a person's level of knowledge and understanding. Do not assume or guess what the implications of an impairment are. Rather ask and find out. It's okay to ask for help. Please resist asking for help in case they look as though they are struggling. Sorry, people may resist asking for help in case they look as though they are struggling. So there's no issue with saying, can I help push your wheelchair? I might say, no thanks. Or can I help you? And the assumption is I need a push. I might say, yes, of course. Won't you pick that up off the ground for me? So asking is a very, very powerful thing to do for a person with a disability, a powerful asset that you should own. So let me give you some examples. We say people with disabilities avoid physically challenged, differently abled. It's a person with cerebral palsy, not suffers from or is afflicted with or is a victim of. We are not wheelchair bound or confined to a wheelchair. We use a wheelchair or we are a wheelchair user. And if you want to bind me to a wheelchair, get a rope tied around me 10 times and then I'm absolutely bound and confined. In fact, as a wheelchair user, if I have the right wheelchair, I'm not confined. I'm absolutely free. And that's important for you to understand. So when you refer to us, it's we are people with disabilities. We have a disability. We're not handicapped, crippled, physically or mentally challenged. And then, of course, we're not patient or invalid. We are client, customer, or guest, depending on your environment. All right, and the part that for me is obviously very important, and the part that I would like to try and convey to all of you present here today, and especially on this 3rd of December, International Day of Persons with Disabilities. See us in the workplace as a value proposition. If you look into employ people with disabilities, there is a value proposition, and I'll tell you what it is. Staff with a disability demonstrate high levels of loyalty. The level of employee turnover for people with a disability is low, and their retention rates are high. Organizations that employ people with disabilities are often regarded by their employees to be good employers. Employing people with disabilities makes a positive impact on your reputation and brand. On average, staff with a disability have productive rates comparable to other employees. Employing people with a disability has shown to build staff morale and teamwork. Staff with a disability have a low incidence of workplace injury. And I can show you research that's been done in companies that have employed people with disabilities that have shown that the sick leave of other employees has reduced by sometimes 50% because people with disabilities in the workplace have influenced their fellow colleagues, that the headache or the pain is not so great if you're working next to someone with a disability. Sick leave has reduced by 50% at least in some companies, in some research, because those companies have people with disabilities integrated. Okay, so I've always thought, unfortunately, 2020 has been a terrible year for all of us. However, it has given opportunity for people with disabilities to be recognized and to be considered in the workplace, because a lot of the workplace has moved home. And so I see COVID-19 as a bit of a black swan, and a black swan gives opportunities. I mean, if you think that one-time airline started after 9/11, because very few people started flying after that. And so the owners of One Time went and bought a couple of aircraft from the States, started One Time Airline. You know, it gave them an opportunity. There's in lockdown restrictions, so very few people are going into the workplace. People with disabilities are a bit risky to COVID-19, and they feel that it's a health risk. You don't have to worry about space protocols. So, you know, when you space out the workplace, if people are working in an office now and can't work from home, you know, people with disabilities are difficult to provide reasonable accommodation for in the workplace under these lockdown conditions. So what's the value proposition? We don't have any transport issues or elements, because transport is a huge problem for people with disabilities. Reasonable accommodation is much easier. You need to provide maybe a device, some Wi-Fi, security, electricity in some cases. So you don't have any reasonable or very few reasonable accommodation issues and costs. It's much less cost for each staff member with a disability. You can introduce flexible working hours. There's no security issues. The only issue that you might have, or something that you need to work around, is how do you measure productivity and information security. So I urge employers to look out there and say, well, is there a job available for a person with a disability that can work from home now? There are a tremendous amount of skills amongst the disability sector. And I can show you where to find those skills, where the organizations are that have the databases and CVs of people with disabilities. Here, through COVID-19, this black swan is an opportunity for you to possibly tick your employment equity status. Something, I'll just give you 15 to 20 seconds just to read some of these quotes. I'm asking you, take a leap of faith. Let everyone have an opportunity to reach their full potential. Before I say thank you, first of all, there are my contact details on the slide. I've been working in the disability sector formally for 20 years with all the different types of disabilities at various different levels, from the trenches to Parliament. And I coined a phrase which I think has so much substance in it. If you can see, then you must have vision. If you can hear, then you must listen. And if you can walk, then you must walk your talk. Thank you very much.
Colleagues, maybe if I can just elaborate on something. You know what, we've been in the employment equity industry for just about 13 years. And Ari mentioned something about the valuable proposition, or the value proposition by companies in South Africa. Ari, if you can maybe elaborate, and I can mention the name, I know it's being recorded, we will place onto YouTube, but there's quite a prominent retail store by the name of Woolworths, and they, meaning now the company, employed a couple of deaf employees. Okay, so in other words, said, you know what, we're going to give you a t-shirt. You might have seen that in the past, saying, you know what, I'm deaf, I cannot hear you. And it actually went quite onto social media, where people said, you know what, we're going to support Woolworths even more, just due to the fact that they or implemented a disability campaign. Ari, you can elaborate on that. What were the results for this company?
Well, that was interesting. And I mean, to be honest, as a wheelchair user, as a quadriplegic, we feel sort of almost undone and challenged by the deaf sector, who beat us and made a much better value proposition to Woolworths than wheelchair users did. So there's a lot of competition amongst the disability sector for jobs that are going. And let me explain why. Previously, you would take your groceries to the till at Woolworths and you'd say to the lady, "Morning, ma'am. Oh, man, I've had such a tough day, and look at the price of your pawpaws, and things are really going up in Woolworths at the moment, honey. Your quality is good, but wow, man, my budget's small now." And you'd have this conversation, the queue would be held up. They'd need twice as many till points because of the conversations that I and all the others want to have. Now with deaf people, nobody says a word. You just put your groceries in, soup, soup, soup. They go through. The queue goes twice as fast, or you only need half the number of tellers operating because no one engages in a conversation. How's that for a value proposition for Woolworths? Now the deaf sector is in huge demand for checkout at the till. I mean, what a wonderful combination. So well done to them. And I see Checkers is also moving into that program now. So it makes absolute sense. Pieter, if I can ask, can you type my email address into the chat box as well? You've got it there.
And thank you, Ari, for an extremely inspiring and informative presentation. Then from Elena, thank you, Ari. What a wonderful, insightful presentation. Then thank you so much. Can I please ask a question? Okay, so I see your name as L. Mlotsa. More than welcome. You can maybe just unmute yourself and raise your question.
Ari, thank you so much for this presentation. It's very insightful for me, who's an HR person doing this. My question is, we are currently running a nomination process for our Employment Equity Committee. And it was easy for us to give a list of people in senior management or people in this occupational level that employees can select from to nominate. However, it's quite difficult for us to make a decision in terms of how do we disclose persons with disabilities without offending or divulging information that people would not want us to divulge. So that's the challenge that we're sitting with.
Very interesting question. So first of all, I've just posted my email address because this can get quite technical and I can have a long conversation with you on email that would be substantially important for you. But let's just talk about the very simple theory. Is people with disabilities, if you don't disclose your disability, then don't expect reasonable accommodation, and that's your right not to disclose. I mean, of course, I as a wheelchair user have a very difficult position not to disclose. I mean, if I didn't have my wheelchair, I'd be crawling, into the office. So, however, people with other disabilities choose not to disclose. And so they don't want to be on your employment equity register. That is their choice, actually. And if they do disclose, then I do believe, you see, quite often when it comes to employment equity committees, people pepper the committees with everyone with a disability. That's not necessary. Not everyone with a disability wants to be in the employment equity committee.
Correct.
They'd rather not. But however, I do believe you must have some representation of people with disabilities on your employment equity committee. But it's not a compulsory thing that if you have a disability, you have to serve on that committee. I think you need to be quite sensitive to that. But you email me and I'll cite you some examples of what of a good model and a bad model.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Ari. And I will elaborate in the presentation a little bit later as well. Remember one thing, pertaining to the employment equity legislation, if an employee does not want to classify him or herself as being disabled on the EEA1 form, that's the declaration of the employee, then by law you are not allowed to place onto your committee and or your EEA2 report that person being disabled. Okay, so bear that in mind. I think what you will need to do, of course, is see what the person is placing into the EEA1 declaration of employee, and then one can take it from there. But as I mentioned, feel free to pop him an email. We'll get to his email address just now as well. Then I've got from Sandile, good day colleagues. Ari, this one for you. Pieter, I've got a question. Ari, please, how does you suggest an organization gets their workforce comfortable to disclose their disability? It seems there is a fear.
Very interesting. And, you know, no different to HIV/AIDS in the workplace. You know, of course, the 1st of December was World AIDS Day. And, you know, HIV and AIDS issues actually became more prevalent and difficult to deal with than disability. Disclosure is a very interesting thing. It can't be imposed upon the person with the disability, and nor can the non-disclosure be unjustifiable hardship for the employer. So how do you make your workplace comfortable, your workforce comfortable? I would say what you don't do is you don't incentivize disability. You really don't want to say, okay, if you tell us, we'll give you reasonable accommodation. If we tell us, we'll change your job position, or we'll make your job easier, or you'll make your hours less. That creates resentment amongst people that aren't people with disability. So I can't answer that question specific because there's an underlying issue in your workplace. Sandile, you email me and I will give you some creative solutions to that. But don't incentivize the disclosure of disability because it does just causes a rift between those that have disability and those that don't.
John, thanks a lot for that. Ari, hopefully your question is answered there, Sandile. You know what we have seen in practice is that people with disabilities, there's a stigma of, if I'm going to declare on the EEA1, I might lose my job, or I might not enhance in employment, or whatever the case may be. Okay, so my recommendation there would be talk to Ari, see if he can maybe, like today, have a 1 hour session with your employees and all committee members, stating that, guys, colleagues, ladies and gents, please don't be afraid of disclosing, because when you look at employment equity, it's a green report should you have disabled people in your workforce. But due to the stigma, people are afraid because I'm going to lose my job. And that's not the case. Maybe try and see if you can have a disability campaign. Ari can maybe introduce himself to your company and maybe have a lack discussion. Ari, of course, you will elaborate on that should Sandile pop you an email, because that could be to your benefit. Okay. Then from Heather, I have a question here. Hi there. Ari, is dyslexia seen as a disability?
Interesting question. Absolutely. Absolutely. Of course, there is dyslexia in a mild form to an extreme form. So I think it's fair that the person with dyslexia would be able to get a medical report that the medical practitioner would then have to make a declaration that would state that that person is disabled to a certain extent through dyslexia. Some people are inconvenienced by dyslexia. Some people are inconvenienced by maybe a different walking gait. They are inconvenienced. Their walking speed might not be the same as someone that has no difficulty in walking. So, people say it's debatable, but there are different levels of dyslexia. Certainly, severe dyslexia is an absolute disability. And, you know, there's so many things that can change the way that you can overcome dyslexia in terms of technical support, that the reasonable accommodation is easily put forward to someone with dyslexia. Voice-activated software is a wonderful asset to somebody, for example, who can't type very well or will never master a keyboard.
Thanks a lot for that, Ari. Okay, then we have
Can I just mention one thing, Pieter?
Yes.
And it's something to say, well, where do we get all these people from? If you email me, I can email you where to find good databases of people with disabilities without having to go through a recruitment agency. And then I can also email you good recruitment agencies. If you want to look to go through a recruitment agency, because they offer good guarantees and they do the competency testing, etc., I can email you good employment agencies as well. I mean, I'm well aware of all of them. And I can also email you the list of the members of the South African Disability Alliance, which is the organization that holds all of the national disability agencies. They are members of the South African Disability Alliance. So it's a very useful network to get into. So if you're looking for people with disabilities, you know where to find them. I don't assume people all read newspapers or that all listen to the radio. They don't. And, you know, it must be quite difficult when you post an advert looking for a person with disability. You know, the responses, you get hundreds of them, and you must wonder who amongst all these is actually a person with a disability and who's not. Because people are desperate for work now. They'll try every avenue to get work. A poor example, in China, there was an athlete who just couldn't make the Olympic team. So he had his leg amputated, and 4 years later, he made the Paralympic team. That's how desperate he was to go to the Olympics. I mean, just an example of what people will do to get recognition or to get opportunity.
Okay, thanks for that. From Luann, employees with existing disabilities are reticent to declare their status on the EEA1, especially if not a parent. How do we change this? And as mentioned, at the end of the day, you will need to look at the EEA1 document. Number 2, try a disability campaign. Number 3, if any employee refuses to complete the EEA1, by law, you are allowed in front of a witness to complete the EEA1 on the employee's behalf based on historic and current conditions. Okay, so in other words, what you can see. Okay, then from Jana, thank you, Ari. Makro, okay, this is statement. Makro also employs deaf employees with plates that state they are deaf. Okay, so thanks for that, Jana. Then to everyone, Ari's email address, but I will also email it to all the delegates.
I've also posted it now. So if you guys scroll down, you'll find it there. And Pieter, you can do the same. And as I mentioned, you know, just sort of finally, I'm happy, you know, my presentation is no intellectual property. Guys, if it helps you make this process easier, I'll be so thrilled. And I'll be happy to help on email anybody that's got any problems and that wants to open this opportunity up.
Okay, Ari, since we are making a recording, can you just maybe say out loud your email address?
Of course. aris@iafrica.com.
Thank you. So it will be placed onto YouTube by Monday morning, 8 o'clock as well. So then from Eileen, hi there. If I can also ask a question in connection with an employee who has recently fell ill and can only operate with a wheelchair at the moment due to lung and heart issues. Eileen, would you like to maybe unmute yourself and just elaborate on your question?
Hi, Pieter. Yes. From my side, this person was a lady who worked in the financial department. However, she fell ill during the winter time, and she was in hospital for very long. She was then sent home, and she's at the moment where she is unable to walk without, or to move without a wheelchair. Now, we are waiting for her to go and see a doctor in March. However, I just want to know if this person can be identified as somebody that is disabled at the moment. We have occupied her or assisted her to work from home at the moment. So, yeah, where does that leave us with this person?
Well, yeah, you've convinced me. Absolutely, the person has a disability. It's quite clear. However, is it long-term and recurring? That a doctor will answer. But
Ari, I must say that I've met with this lady now, and I really believe that she won't ever be able to move around without that. It's mainly the heart and the lungs, and yeah, she's just struggling.
yeah, then it's quite clear. You have a person with a disability on your staff, and he or she. Did you say she?
Yes.
I mean, she's got to put her hand up, and if she wants to be accommodated, you are already providing reasonable accommodation that she's working from home, so I don't know whether you see there's a problem or it's an opportunity.
Yeah, my question actually is, how do I then get this person, to sign the EA1 form and, to declare? Because I know Pieter said now that, the person needs to agree to do that. And then will I then change her on my plan, or how does that work?
Yes, absolutely. She must disclose. I mean, it's quite obvious that she has a disability now because her health condition has become disabling, and now she uses a wheelchair for her mobility, which meant the workplace would have to be adapted, the workstation would have to be adapted, your whole evacuation plan would have to change. There's so many, probably parking allocated, whether she needs assistance or not, whether you change her work environment to the ground floor instead of the third floor, and then yes, of course, she would come onto your staff with disabilities register. She would be recognized as a person with a disability in your staff, and you would now have +1.
Yeah, and then yes, and then what would happen is in your EEPlan on the online portal, we will have a discussion, because what would then happen, we will just say that an able person became a non-able person. Okay, and that will be recognized then by the Department of Employment and Labour as well.
Okay, thank you guys.
Happy with that. Okay, then from Colin, hi, Ari. Problem I am experiencing is that people with disabilities are not being employed due to facilities and offices not complying to accommodate people with disabilities. So from our side, out of an employment equity point of view, Colin, your company will then identify in your EAP analysis a barrier under work environment and facilities on this is the problem we are experiencing, and then you will have an affirmative action measure on how or what your company can do to overcome that barrier. Ari, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I was just reading another question here. Can I just cover that? Because I know it's something that's very important, is that if you're working, can you claim a disability grant? The answer is no, you cannot. If you're working, you cannot claim a disability grant. That is, in fact, it's fraud. Now regarding facilities that cannot be, that are not accessible for people with disabilities, if you ask me what would I do about it, first of all, who owns the building? If you own the building, then you're in trouble. You're very vulnerable. If the landlord, if it's owned by a landlord that you're renting from, it gives you grounds to go to a landlord and insist that the building is made accessible for someone, let's say, for example, as a wheelchair user. And if they don't, then you have grounds to cancel your lease. By law, you would have grounds to cancel your lease. But of course, that's a long fight you're going to have ahead of you. And it's a very common problem that people have. You know, the right candidate comes for the right job, and then the company suddenly realizes that their premises are not accessible, and they don't own the premises. And I'll tell you what, organizations like the Quad Para Association of South Africa would take a class action on your behalf if that was necessary. So disability sector would really support an employer in this circumstance.
And the Department of Employment and Labour as well. Colin, in ECMS's presentation, I will elaborate a little bit on the work environment and facilities based on your question there. So the last question I see here, Ari, I know that you've got other commitments as well. From Jana, she's raised her hand. She wants to clarify a couple of things. Jana, feel free to unmute yourself, raise your queries.
Hi, can you hear me, Ari and Pieter?
Yes, loud and clear.
Hi. Okay, so the dyslexia that you said is classified as a disability. If that person works with finances, obviously it can be a predicament because a zero can make millions of difference. So, and you cannot discriminate against a disability. So is it the employer's job, obviously, to send them on training to try to rectify it? Or when do you say, listen, we cannot accommodate your disability? That's my first question.
Okay. So, Jana, I don't want to, and I've got an answer for you, but I think you should email me on this.
Okay.
I don't want to incriminate myself here,
okay.
but there's certainly some solution. So you email me and I'll help you with a solution.
Okay. And then
because it can be quite, the disability sector can also stand up often for the employer.
Yeah.
And the disability sector also says to the employer, you know, some people with disabilities take a huge advantage of what they define as reasonable accommodation and what their rights are. And yet they can't do the job that the CV says that they can, or that they're qualified in.
Okay.
And quite often this is the case.
Okay. And then the EEA1 form, I know that with gender and race, if it's a black person and you see it's a black person, if they tick themselves as white, that's how you must disclose them. The same with the disability. If they don't disclose it, you cannot do anything about it. But my thing is, for example, a wheelchair. So you can physically see that person is physically disabled. So even if he puts he's not disabled, you must put him under the normal employees.
Absolutely, yes. In other words, the Department of Employment and Labour and Legislation utilizes the EEA1, and whatsoever the employee inputs and or complete on the EEA1, it's your company's responsibility to submit as such. So in other words, if a disabled person does not classify him or herself as being disabled, you cannot change it for EEA2 reporting purposes. Then you have to accept it as is.
Okay. And then, sorry, one of my last questions, mental illness. This comes as what classifies as disabilities and what not. So mental illness is an invisible thing. It's an unseen thing, so it's more difficult. How do you handle that? Which mental illnesses, for instance, if you're bipolar, count as a disability? And also, if people argue with you and they say that they have hypertension and high blood pressure, and they say that's a disability, but it's clearly not.
Wow, interesting. Yes, it's not the first time, and you're very brave to put these on the table. First of all, I can direct you on an email as well to the person who's the CEO of South African Mental Health Association, and she will give you very good guidance on that to deal with that problem where people have decided that they've got mental health issues. And then, of course, what was the other one you mentioned?
Hypertension, high blood pressure, those things, that is not a disability, but
Yeah, no, yeah. We're a bit sensitive. People with disabilities, you know, the real lobby and advocates we're a bit sensitive to this now. You know, everybody with high blood pressure or temperature, and then it's just growing this database of people with disabilities.
exactly.
We're also quite possessive about this space. And we don't want everybody to occupy this space. You know, so yeah, Jana, email me.
I will
Yeah.
definitely.
Just to answer or elaborate on that, Jana, high blood pressure would not be deemed a disability because you can use
Definitely.
medication for that. Okay, so I mean,
Yes.
I've had high blood pressure and I've been on medication for the past 6-7 years or so.
Yeah.
But no one, you know what, at the end of the day, I always tell the company, should you have had a disability fund and now you become from able to disabled, would they cover you? Yes or no? High blood pressure, definitely not. Okay, the law goes further and beyond. If you can use medication, etc., then that's not deemed.
Yes, but that's my question. You can continue your work, but that person insists on ticking them as they are disabled, but high blood pressure isn't. So how do you handle that?
Usually it comes with a medical report as well. So in other words, according to me, you will be able to tell this employee, you know what, please provide me with, I think they call it, Ari, what, a practitioner's report?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Okay, thank you so much. The EAP, can we get that information on the Stats SA? Or
I will elaborate on that in the presentation that will follow just now. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Colin, you can send me an email, more than welcome. And then maybe one last question, Ari. People with long-term sugar diabetes regarded as disability or not?
It depends on the impact of the sugar diabetes. Okay, so someone with sugar diabetes, I'm going to say no, and then someone with sugar diabetes put their hand up and say, well, look, I use a wheelchair because it has immobilized me. And then I say, well, of course, if you're using a wheelchair, then yes, you have a disability because your mobility is impaired. But I mean, if you're going to compete with you know, an athlete with your sugar diabetes, then the answer is no. And if it means you can only, if you can only be active for 6 hours a day, then of course it's a disability because you can't function more than 6 hours a day. With no doubt, sugar diabetes means that you can't function the whole day. It's a disability, and your doctor will declare that.
Thanks a lot for
Also,
that, Ari.
Any sensitive questions, email me, and if I don't have the answer, I'll find you the expert who can give you the answer without risk. And I think that's important. And I'd hate to say something off the cuff here, and then tomorrow you phone me and you tell me that you're at CCMA and I need to assist you. So put the sensitive questions.
Point taken.
But just to mention, Pieter, especially today, I'm finding ways to say, look to the disability sector. You know, tick those boxes in employment equity. Bring people in the workplace, not because you have to, it's because you see there's a value proposition. You see more than just the CV. You see what how it's going to influence your workplace as well. You know, you can't measure the influence, the positive influence brought into the workplace if you have a positive person with a disability. Some of the references we've had just now are just people that make it miserable and make it just unfortunate to employ people with disabilities. Most people with disabilities will change a workplace culture. They will change the way people think about themselves. They will make people realize that life is not that tough, actually, people without disabilities. And you'll see a very great impact.
Oh, thanks a lot for that, Ari. As mentioned, I do know that you have other commitments. Ari, for your time, thank you very, very much. I see there's another question from Colin. Are diabetes and hypertension comorbidities? Disability, I think that was answered somewhat just now. Colin, feel free to email Ari, and then I'm sure that he will respond as he has mentioned.
Baie dankie almal. Siyabonga kakhulu. Thank you, Pieter, and everyone on board. And it was a great privilege for me to spend some time with you, especially here on International Day for People with Disabilities.
We really do appreciate it. Thanks a lot for your time, Ari.
Thank you, Ari.
As mentioned, everyone, thanks a lot for attending this webinar. My name is Pieter from EECMS. Again, a company dealing in employment equity. I'm one of the senior consultants, been in the industry for just about 13 years. Went through more than 70 DG reviews the past, give or take 12 months, with 100% pass rate at our company. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a like presentation, informative hopefully, and please feel free to stop me and ask your questions. Presentation on the summary of the Employment Equity Act number 55 of 1998, as well as amended Act and the regulations. There was an article that came out yesterday that the amendment bill is now again open for public comments and will be closed the 19th of February 2021. Okay, so colleagues, I'm going to touch base just on 2 or 3 of the biggest proposed changes in the amendment bill. And I do believe it was supposed to have been gazetted before the 31st of August 2020, and then COVID happened. So I do believe that the Act will be amended definitely 99.99% before 31 August 2021. And as mentioned, I will touch base on some of the biggest proposed amendments. Let's first talk about the purpose of the Act. The purpose is to achieve equity in the workplace by promoting equal opportunity and fair treatment in employment through the elimination of unfair discrimination. Also to implement affirmative action measures to redress the disadvantages in employment of designated groups. Ladies and gents, colleagues, first of all, to achieve equity in the workplace. What is the workplace? So at EECMS, we have, let's say, 100 people working in the company, and the workplace would be your top management, down to your senior management, your middle management, junior management, semi-skilled, unskilled, and then your temporary employees. Okay, so the Department of Employment and Labour and Legislation would like to see that companies try their best to achieve equity by promoting equal opportunity and fair treatment throughout top, senior, middle, junior management, semi-skilled, and unskilled. Definition of designated groups. Designated groups include the following. It's all your African males and females, colored males and females, Indian males and females. White females are included in the employment equity legislation as being deemed designated groups. Remember, this is not the BEE Act, it's employment equity. It's 2 different legislations. For employment equity, white females are still deemed designated groups, as well as all your disabled staff. Okay, so what Ari mentioned, disabled staff, okay, the target is 2% for employment equity purposes. White males, disabled, are still included as being designated under the employment equity legislation. Should we employ the 100 people at EECMS? The Department of Employment and Labour would like to see that we try our best to employ at least 2 disabled people. Designated groups exclude the following. It's your white males and foreign nationals. Colleagues, the purpose of the Act is not to get rid of and or terminate and or fire white males in your company. Okay, should an opportunity arise, let's say you have a white male maybe retiring 3 years from now, to see what the company can do to identify, based according to EAP targets, the highest underrepresented races and genders, and then to see if the company can try their best to promote within the highest underrepresented race and genders should that white male maybe retire 3 years from now. Okay, so let us proceed. Who needs to comply? Designated employers are all companies employing 50 or more people. Okay, or if you have a total annual turnover threshold above Schedule 4 of the Act, and I'll get to that just now. Okay, so currently, the first question we would ask a company is, number one, do you employ more than 50 people? Yes, we do. Okay, you are deemed designated. You need to comply with everything that I'm going to tell you about just now. Then the second question, no, we are less than 50 people. So the question then is your annual turnover threshold above what you see here in front of you? So let me take agriculture. We visit a farm and we ask number of employees. ECMS, we employ 15 people in our company. Okay. Annual turnover, is it more than 6 million rand? Yes, it is. In that regard, you are then also deemed a designated employer, irrelevant of the number of employees employed by your company. Mining and quarrying, 22.5 million, manufacturing, 30 million. And so I can go on. Retail, 45 million, wholesale, 75 million, finance, business services, 30 million, etc., etc. Okay. Companies can also volunteer to comply. That being said, voluntary compliance is something that, as per the proposed amendment bill, will fall away. The annual threshold in terms of your turnover is one of the proposed amendments that will also fall away. In other words, meaning the following. Should your company employ less than 50 people, you will be deemed non-designated for employment equity. Question will not arise anymore. Agriculture, yes, we have 15 people working for us. Our turnover is 10 million for that matter. It's irrelevant. You employ less than 50 people. So you will be deemed non-designated and you will be able to complete a Section 16B document as per the proposed amendment bill to say, you know what, you are immediately in total and full EE compliance pertaining to Chapter 3 of the Act. Still on the summary of the Act, no person may unfairly discriminate against an employee in any policy or practice. As Ari has mentioned, discrimination can be based on any of the following grounds: race, gender, pregnancy, marital status, color, sexual orientation, age, disability. He elaborated on that quite a bit. Religion, HIV status, goes on conscience, belief, etc. Okay, so hopefully by now, all delegates attending this webinar would know what is allowed and what is not allowed in terms and or pertaining to disabilities and other discriminatory purposes in your company. What is allowed and what's not allowed. Okay. Medical testing, it's permissible only when legislation requires the testing or when it's justifiable for various reasons. Okay, colleagues, just to give you an example, if you look at the health, safety and environmental legislation, you maybe have, you're operating a mine and you maybe have a female working underground. So they call it a red card. What happens is they ask certain questions, things like a lung capacity test, things that pertaining to the health and safety environmental legislation, it is permissible. Females, you maybe become pregnant, you work underground, then of course the gases being released could be harmful to a mother and or unborn child. So it's justifiable to ask those couple of questions and it is permissible. HIV testing on the other hand, it's completely prohibited unless determined to be justifiable by the labor court. Okay, just to give you an example, would be justifiable by the labor court in your medical industry, paramedics, people working in hospitals, nurses, people working in the ICU department. That would be justifiable by the labor court from the employer to request the employee to regularly undergo HIV testing. Why? Because should a paramedic, as an example, carry the HIV, the virus, it could be transferred to the patient. Therefore, it's permissible. Okay, so how does it work? Labor inspectors. There might be a couple of companies in this webinar that either currently is undergoing DG reviews and or inspections by the labor inspectors and or maybe previously undergone. So what's the powers of the labor inspectors? How does it work? You have the newly appointed Minister of Employment and Labor. Remember, it used to be the DOL, Department of Labor. That changed last year to the DEL, being the Department of Employment and Labor. We have the newly appointed minister, his name is Tulas Mpeksi, and then the minister have within the Department of Employment and Labor, the Director General, the DG, Mr. Lamini. And then the DG has the authority to appoint hundreds of inspectors throughout South Africa. Those inspectors go out to companies, and what do? They do investigations, inspections, to see whether your company, if you are deemed a designated employer, are in total and full compliance with the Employment Equity Act. Should your company not be in compliance, number one, the labor inspector can give you an undertaking to comply, allowing you X number of days to say, please, you have so many days, please comply with either the things that you're not compliant with and or partially compliant with. Number two, the inspector can give you a compliance order stating you have so many days to get your house in order pertaining to employment equity. Please work on our DG review recommendations. And number three, colleagues, you can maybe just make a note of the following. It's not in this presentation. The Department of Employment and Labor inspectors can send your company to the labor court with immediate effect without an undertaking and or compliance order if, number one, and please make note of this, if you did not perform an EAP analysis, could result in an immediate referral. Number two, if you did not prepare an employment equity plan, could result in an immediate referral to the labor court. And number three, if you have not submitted your EEA2 and your EEA4 reports to the Department of Employment and Labor. Okay, so for those three things, it could result in an immediate referral. Labor inspectors go out to companies. Number one, it could be haphazardly, in other words, randomly. Labor inspector goes from one company to the next saying, you know what, we are here, we want to see your turnover and all your financial statements and the number of employees. Okay, you are deemed designated. Let's see, provide us with the following. Number two, if you have submitted your reports incorrectly to the Department of Employment and Labor, it could be red flagged. And then, of course, number three, if maybe a disgruntled employee of the company reported your company to the Department of Employment and Labor, your chances would be extremely likely that your company will be investigated by an inspector from the DEL. Okay, so in other words, maybe a grieved employee, usually the department then goes out and the inspectors then look at your contracts of employment, basic conditions of employment, your health and safety, your EE reporting, your employment equity, etc., etc. Okay. On this slide, the review by the Director General, bottom line is the following. Director General may conduct a review and or his inspectors. In order to conduct a review, the DG may request a copy of your analysis, any other documentation. They even go as far as to have interviews with your committee members to verify, number one, whether there's really substance over legal form. Okay, so what we have seen the past couple of years, a company would say, but you know what, we have everything in place. We've got this, we've got that, and we are in total and full EE compliance without noticing and or notifying our committee. Okay, so in other words, is there really substance? Gone are the days where you just say, I've got this and I've got that and I'm in total compliance. No. Did you discuss it with your committee? Did your committee, were they involved? Did you have the quarterly meetings? Of course, you cannot have 4 meetings on one day. The EE committee needs to be able to monitor your EEPlan and your analysis, etc., throughout the year by means of quarterly meetings. So in other words, important here, substance and legal form. The Labour Court has the power to make appropriate orders, award compensation, impose penalties for non-compliance with Section 16, 17, 19, 20, etc. Fines and penalties payable to the National Revenue Fund. As far as I do understand, the National Revenue Fund utilize those penalties in the upliftment of communities in terms of the building of hospitals, building of schools, etc. Colleagues, let's have a look at the penalties. If your company is non-compliant with Section 16, 17, 19, and I can go on up to 43/2, if you have no previous contravention of the Employment Equity Act, it could result in a 1.5 million rand penalty. On top of that, if you also do not comply with Section 20, 21, 23, and or 44B, it could result in an additional 1.5 million rand or 2% of turnover, of course, the highest of. So bottom line is following. Your company is in non-compliance with the EE Act, minimum penalty equals 3 million rand or more. Okay, so just about 2-3 years ago, 21 companies received the steep penalties. 11 of them, as far as I do understand, were JSE listed companies. The other 10 were major corporates. And the previous Minister of Employment and Labour, or Department of Labour at that point in time, Mildred Oliphant, noted that companies still budget for penalties. So thank you very much. 3 million rand penalty. It does not end there, colleagues. Next year, the Department of Employment and Labour inspectors will be back. One previous contravention in respect of the same provision. Thank you very much for your 3 million rand or more. An additional 1.8 million plus 1.8 million or 4% of turnover. Okay, so we are making a lot of money. You received our 3 million. There is another 3.6 million. Bob's your uncle. Thank you very much. No, it's not. The department inspectors will be back. An additional 2.1 plus 2.1 or 6% of turnover. Transfer the money. An additional the following year. 2.4 plus 2.48% of turnover. An additional. And so I can go on. Okay, so colleagues, you will see the penalties are extremely steep. When we had a discussion with the Directorate and the Department of Employment and Labour a couple of years ago, we said, you know what? If companies receive these steep penalties, what's going to happen? You pay the penalty and or not, but let's assume you pay it, and then you will cut most probably on staff, salaries, wages. Okay, colleagues, what I can mention to you, now believe you me, the purpose of the Department of Employment and Labour, they are not there to hammer companies with penalties. Okay, they are rather there to enforce compliance. So you should have really showed the Department of Employment and Labour that you are not willing to comply before they will refer you to the Labour Court for these steep penalties. That being said, let's look at the compliance requirement. You need to undertake, comply with Section 13, 15, 16, etc. Let's look at those sections. 13 of the Act stipulates that a designated employer, you'll have to implement affirmative action measures for designated groups to achieve employment equity. And you must, not maybe, you must consult with employees as per Section 16. Bottom line, boiling down to your EE forum and or your EE committee. When you conduct an EAP analysis and when you prepare an employment equity plan. I'm going to get to those just now. Section 15 of the Act stipulates that a designated employer must implement affirmative action measures intended to ensure that suitably qualified employees from designated groups have equal opportunity and are equitably represented on all occupational levels of your workforce. Colleagues, ladies and gents, gone are the day where companies can say, you know what, 90% of our workforce are people from designated groups, but the entire 90% are on semi-skilled and unskilled levels in our organization. Equal opportunity and are equitably represented on top management, senior management, middle management, junior, as well as semi-skilled and unskilled, based on your EAP targets. I'll get to that a little bit later in this presentation. As per section 16 and 17 of the Act, your company will need to take reasonable steps to consult with representatives of employees representing the diverse interests of the workforce when you do your analysis, when you do HR policies, when you prepare your plan, and when you submit your EEA2 report. In other words, we have 100 people here at ECMS. We cannot have quarterly meetings with the entire 100 people in our workforce. So you have to take reasonable steps, usually a formal nomination process, and identify representatives by means of a count of vote that will carry the interests of the workforce. EE committee or EE forum. If you do not have an EE committee, please establish one. Now, I'm going to give you some advice. This is not in the presentation. So please write down the following. If you have a visit by an inspector from the Department of Employment and Labour, the inspector would look at the constituency of your committee. And if the constituency of your committee is not 100% correct, the inspector will tell you it's as if your company has done nothing involving everyone. Please resuscitate your committee and do a new EAP analysis plan, submission, etc., etc. So let's look at the constituency of your committee, colleagues. Please write this down. In senior management, top management usually not involved in the EE committee. Some inspectors would require top management to be involved. Others would say, no, we don't want top management to be involved. Why? Because the committee might feel threatened to say their say. So, senior management, you have to have, and write this down, please, at least one person in the company representing senior managers in your company. Okay, so we have one person in our committee thus far. Middle management, should your company employ middle managers, you have to have at least one middle manager representing middle management employees in our company. Then junior management, should we employ junior managers, please have one junior manager representing junior management in your company. Same for semi-skilled, one person representing semi-skilled. Same for unskilled, one person representing unskilled. Now you have 5 people in your committee thus far. Colleagues, it's imperative to note the following. Not already being the same people in your committee, should you employ African males, you have to have in your committee an additional African male representing African males. Not being allowed to be the same person already nominated for your occupational level. So now we're sitting with person number 6 in our committee. Then you have to have an additional Indian male representing Indian males, colored male representing colored males, white male representing white males. Now you have 9 people in your committee, then you have to have an additional African female representing African females, colored female representing colored females, Indian female representing Indian females, white female representing white females. By default, it goes without saying. Let us assume that you do not employ any Indian females. You don't need to appoint an Indian female in your company to have that representation. You will just have 0 representation on Indian females. Okay, now you have 14 people in your committee. Should your company employ a disabled person, you have to have at least one disabled person representing the disabled. Should your company maybe have shop stewards and or your company is unionized, majority, then you have to have at least one union representative in your committee. Ladies and gents, colleagues, you will see when you are talking and or referring to your EE committee, your committee can be anything 14, 15, 16, 17 people or more, depending, of course, on the structure of your company. If you do not have an EE committee, possible penalty 1.5 million rand. Section 18 of the Act stipulates that designated employers will need to disclose relevant information to the CEO, the EE manager, the committee, and employees when you engage in consultation. Colleagues, please, when you do your EE plan, when you do your EAP analysis, when you do your EEA2 report, etc., 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 you have to disclose the information to the relevant consulting parties. As per Section 19, the analysis, and I know there was a question a bit earlier today, and I will get to the stats of South Africa as per Section 19. Your company, if you are designated, you will have to conduct an analysis of your policies, your practices, your procedures, your work environment. Why? Because then you will need to identify barriers that adversely affect members from designated groups. Once you have done those barriers and or identified them, you will need to implement affirmative action measures on how those barriers will be resolved. Okay, that's deemed a qualitative analysis. So the question earlier today, and I will elaborate a little bit later, if you look at work environment and facilities, might be a barrier. What is an affirmative action measure? We will build RAMs at our office. We will liaise with the disabled of South Africa, disabled youth, or whatsoever the case may be. Okay, so that is called the qualitative analysis. I want to give you an example. Let us assume at ECMS, we have a position available for a financial manager, and let's call it a middle management position in our company. And we say advertising of positions is one of the 23 possible qualitative barriers. Advertising of positions. So ECMS, we go and we place an ad for a financial manager in the Rapport newspaper. Okay, so just to inform everyone, if you're not aware of this, the Rapport newspaper is a paper that you buy on a Sunday, dominantly read by Afrikaans people because it's an Afrikaans paper, and dominantly read by Afrikaans males. So since we say we will place the ad in the Rapport, that will result in a barrier under advertising of positions in our EAP analysis, the qualitative analysis. Why? We are excluding a pool of people. We are excluding the majority of people in South Africa the opportunity to actually look at the ad and apply for that position. So we've identified that barrier and we said, okay, affirmative action measure, what we are going to do is the following. Going forward, we will place the ad onto PNet, OLX, maybe career opportunities on our website, social media, Facebook, and so I can go on. Then the Department of Employment and Labour will accept that as an affirmative action measure. Why? Because you are now including a pool of people, including designated groups. And then on the flip side, you have the quantitative analysis. What does that mean? That means the following. You need to look at the statistics of South Africa. They call it the EAP targets, being now the economically active population targets. And let me give you an example. As at this morning, the EAP target for an African male or African males equals 42.8%. So the Department of Employment and Labour and the legislation would like to see that your company try your best to have 42.8% African males in top management and 42.8% African males in senior management and middle management and junior management and semi-skilled and unskilled. Okay, I will elaborate on the EAP targets a little bit later. What I'd love to tell you is how do we get onto and or where do we get the EAP targets? You receive it from Stats South Africa. What does EAP mean? Economically active population. Stats South Africa and the quarterly labor force survey go, and they say, you know what, give or take, there's 35 million, 34.9 something million people in South Africa that is either employed and or not employed but willing to work between the ages of 15 and 64. Why the age of 15? Because with your parents' consent, at the age of 15, you're allowed to start to work. So between the age of 15 and 64, you have more or less 35 million people, and then Stats South Africa and quarterly labor force survey go, and they say, okay, what is the percentage of African males in this 35 million pool of people? And the latest stat equals 42.8% African male. What is the percentage of African females in this 35 million, give or take, people in South Africa? And that equals, as at this morning, 36%. So now the department wants to see that you try your best in your company to have 36% African females from top management to unskilled. And believe you me, in DG reviews, we've seen where they actually ask a question, why, if, let's assume, a colored male left your entity, you focused on a white male, if white males are already overrepresented? Okay, I will elaborate on that a little bit later. Please take note. If you do not have an EEP analysis, colleagues, it could result in an immediate referral to the Labour Court, 1.5 million rand penalty or 2% of turnover, the highest of. It's not something you submit to the DEL. You have to have it in your file. Okay, so why do you do the EEP analysis? You do your EEP analysis to identify your highest underrepresented races and genders, and then your EEP analysis need to inform your EEPlan, because how can you possibly do an employment equity plan on how you will achieve reasonable progress towards employment equity and or transformation if you do not know where your highest underrepresented races or genders are? So you do your EEP analysis, and by law, your EEP analysis need to inform your EEPlan. Ladies and gents, more often than not, we have visited companies telling us we have submitted our plan to the department. We are in total and fully compliance. Then we tell the company, you know what, give us your plan. Let's quickly scrutinize through it. Let's have a look. Then it's, no, we've submitted it to the department in our EEA2 and 4, meaning our, the EEA2, meaning our goals and targets. You say, no, but where is the EEPlan in the format as prescribed by law in the EEA13? Say, no, we don't know what you are talking about. Then you don't have an employment equity plan. It's a separate document. You don't submit it to the Department of Employment and Labour. Should an inspector visit your company, they will request it, and you can write this down. You can go and Google it. It's in the format of the EEA13. That's EEA13. Separate hard copy in your EE file. If you do not have an EE plan, that could result in an immediate referral to the Labour Court. 1.5 million rand and or 2% of turnover, the highest of. As per section 21. Each and every year, designated employers, you will need to submit your EEA2 and your EEA4 reports to the Department of Employment and Labour. You can do it currently online. Online submissions usually open the 1st of October every year. You have time until the 15th of January 2021. Colleagues, please, I beg of you, do not wait until the 15th of January to submit your EEA2 and your EEA4 reports. If the DL system is maybe offline or overloaded, you cannot connect, whatsoever your reason could be, the Department of Employment and Labour will retaliate and say, but you know what, XYZ company, you had time from 1 October last year. It is no excuse that you couldn't submit on the 15th of January. You had 3.5 months. This is not an excuse. So I'm giving you professional advice here. 13 plus years in the industry. Please do not wait until the 12th, 13th, 14th, or 15th of January. I had a look this morning, 1 minute before 12 o'clock, midnight, 15th of January. The DEL portal will be closed. You cannot do anything thereafter, believe you me. Please do not wait. If you do not submit your EEA2 and your EEA4 reports, immediate referral to the Labour Court, 1.5 million rand or 2% of turnover the greater of. Okay, can maybe make a note of the following. If you are not aware of this, the website to do your online submissions, you can write this down, please. It's www.labour, that's LABOUR.gov, that's GOV.za. When you log onto the online portal, follow and go to online reporting, and then it will request what online reporting do you want to do, and then you can say employment equity and or EE online reporting. Listed entities, I know there's of one listed company that joined here today. As per section 22 of the Act, designate employers. If you are a public company, in other words, JSE listed, you will have to publish a summary of your report, in other words, your workforce profile, in your annual financial report. If not, it could result in a proposed penalty. As per section 23, it is advisable that 6 months before the expiry of your current EE plan, that you start to prepare a subsequent plan. Okay, so in other words, at ECMS, our EE plan expired the 30th of June 2020. The 1st of July, we had a new EE plan. Colleagues, please, not the 7th of July, not the 1st of August. Our plan expired the 30th of June 2020. 1 July 2020, you have to have your new EE plan. Also, red flag, when you submit your EEA2 report, please ensure that you do not overlap your plan dates. And also make sure that you do not say you had a plan that ended 2019 and then you have a new plan that's starting, let's say your current plan expired 30th of June 2019, and now you submit, you have a new plan starting the 1st of July 2020. The department might red flag your company because where is the 12 months? Where is that 1 year that you did not have a plan? Please, colleagues, these are a couple of red flags that I'm mentioning to you. Ensure when your plan expires, the next day you have a new EE plan. As per section 24, designate employers will need to have or must have one or more senior managers to ensure implementation monitoring of your plan. Have to have available resources. If you can please make note of the following, it's not in this presentation. It's a stance that came out by the Department of Employment and Labour a couple of months ago. Please make note of the following and please revisit, if you are the EE manager attending here today, visit your appointment letter and ensure it stipulates the following. Please make note of the following. Number 1, the appointed EE manager is a full-time employee of this company, of your company, of XYZ company. So number 1, you have to be a full-time employee. Number 2, it has to be a senior manager that has direct access to the CEO. Note number 3, as the appointed EE manager, the company made available the necessary and relevant resources and or budgets to ensure that your duties pertaining to employment equity is fulfilled. And then number 4, KPIs and KPIs, referring to key performance areas and key performance indicators, are included in your contract of employment and or an addendum thereto. In other words, the board of directors is supposed to go and say, you know what, you as the EE manager, did you fulfill your duties, and are we monitoring the plan, and are we enhancing, are we improving, are we transforming, are we, etc., etc. And those KPIs and KPIs must be in your employment contract and or addendum thereto. Could result in a 1.5 million rand penalty. Duty to inform. As per section 25, your company, you have to display in the workplace where all employees can see it, the summary of the Employment Equity Act, the basic conditions of the Employment Equity Act as well, where all employees can view it. I know there's companies and or individuals going about and around companies and selling these big A3 posters, nicely laminated, etc., charge quite a substantial amount for that. If you'd like to, you can purchase it from the government printers in Pretoria. Looking at more or less, I think it's, and I'm talking under correction, more or less 23 or 24 rand per poster because it's subsidized by government. They only accept cash. So if you send someone to collect those posters and pay for it, please ensure that they have the relevant cash with them. They do not accept cards. Okay. If you do not have those posters, possible penalty. Duty to keep records. An employer must establish for at least 5 years, colleagues. Please keep hard copy records of everything pertaining to employment equity. At least 5 years. It needs to be in hard copy. And if you do not have it in hard copy, that could result in a possible penalty. As per section 27, income differentials. Okay, so currently, we need to submit your EEA4, in other words, income and income differentials and reasons for differences in income. Please bear in mind, the EEA4 details remuneration. The Act changed the 8th of August 2019. You would have seen now you need to submit between fixed and variable remuneration. The EEA4 is not a public document. It's not to be discussed in your EE committee. It details remuneration. It's confidential information. You do not need to discuss the income differentials and all the EEA4 in your EE committee meetings. Yes, you have to submit it to the Department of Employment and Labour. And yes, there was an article last week where the Department of Employment and Labour actually went and verified and looked at and brought out a statement on the vertical gap between the highest and lowest paid workers in South Africa. Okay, so however you don't discuss it with the committee, believe you me, the Department of Employment and Labour scrutinized through that information. I'm not going to mention any company's names and or vertical gaps. Feel free to Google maybe vertical gap companies in South Africa and you will find more information on the internet pertaining to that. Just on section 27 as well, we do believe that a definition of the National Minimum Wage Commission will be introduced pertaining to the draft amendment bill. And we do believe that going forward, you will need to submit your remuneration of your employees to this National Minimum Wage Commission as well. That being said, back to section 20, pertaining now to the Employment Equity Plan. One of the big changes in the draft amendment bill is that the Minister of Employment and Labour, Tulas, will going forward introduce sectoral targets. So in other words, our belief system, and I'm talking under correction, but what we do believe might happen next year is that the department would say, you know what, you not only work on EAP targets, we're going to introduce sectoral targets. So what I do think is going to happen is construction companies will be benchmarked with construction companies, transport companies with transport companies. Okay, according to me, that might be quite beneficial because majority of people in a construction company equals males because it's a male-dominant industry. So hopefully, the Department of Employment and Labour will say in the construction industry, we do appreciate and do understand that it's a person throwing around bricks and working on scaffolding and etc. You will be benchmarked, we do believe, with other construction companies throughout South Africa. What I do think, and again, please remember, this is a draft amendment bill. So again, I'm talking under correction, but what I do think is going to happen is that all companies' employment equity plans will be null and void to say now there's EAP targets and sectoral targets. Revisit your EAP analysis, revisit your EE plan. And then lastly, as per section 43 and 44, when an inspector goes to your company and they do an investigation, they usually call that a procedural inspection, might turn it around to a substantive investigation, meaning a DG review. Then they allocate a 60-day time frame. Please, colleagues, if the Department of Employment and Labour and DG review say these are the recommendations and we want these recommendations by the 25th of January 2021, and you forfeit by 1 day, it will be referred to the Labour Court. And the Department of Employment and Labour inspector would say, sorry, it's now in a legal process. I cannot do anything about it. Wait for your court date. Okay, so if there's any companies in this webinar currently under a DG review and you have your time frames allocated to you, please adhere to those time frames. I quickly want to share something with you. We are almost done. I'm just going to open our online portal. Okay, this is the online portal that we assist companies with throughout South Africa to be in total and full EE compliance. What you see in front of you is a demo company, so it's fixtures information. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of this. If you need more information on how we can assist, feel free to pop me an email. You have my email address at CP. That's for Charlie Papa. In other words, cp@eecms.co.za. EECMS for Employment Equity Compliance Management Services. So what I'd love to show you here is the following. Strictly speaking, you have to, each and every time before your company recruit and or promote and or terminate for that matter, a person, you need to look at the EAP targets. I will, for now, somewhere on demo company, just to show an example, colleagues, I'm going to utilize junior management. Okay, so what do you need to do? What does your company need to do? We need a supervisor at ECMS, and we're saying, thank you very much. Let's have a look. We're going to place an ad in the newspaper, and Bob's your uncle, we're just going to employ. No. Please do not do it that way. You place the ad in the newspaper, whichever you'd like to. But you have to, by law, prioritize the highest underrepresented races and genders in each occupational level before you recruit and or promote. So what do you see in front of you? You see the online portal that all our clients have. And you have your statistics, the EAP stats, at the top. Colleagues, if you want to, I'm going to give you the opportunity. You can write down these EAP statistics. However, it will be loaded onto YouTube, hopefully by Monday morning, 8 o'clock. Bottom line is following. Out of the 35 million people, give or take, out of that population between 15 and 64 years of age, African males equals 42.8%. That's the requirement. Then your company will need to determine your actual. And how do you determine that? Let's have a look at junior management. You can see I've highlighted there. In demo company, we have 15 African males out of a total of 19. So you'll need to go and say, take 15 divided by 19. And that gives you a representation of 78.95%. The target is 42.8, resulting in an over-representation of 36.15%. So in other words, let's take an easy one. Colored males target equals 5.2%. These are the statistics as at 3 December 2020. Target is 5.2%. We have 0 headcount, resulting in 0 actual, resulting in a minus 5.2%. And this you need to do for all your races and genders. Now we want to appoint a team leader or a supervisor, resulting in junior management. Our first priority equals African female. Why? The target is 36%, colleagues. We have 3 out of 19, resulting in 15.79%, resulting in an underachieved of 20.21%. Therefore, priority number 1, African female. Okay, so we're going to employ a junior manager, and now we say, this is now just an example of the EAP worksheet, and let's have a look. You need to do this not only when you promote and or terminate and or employ someone, but remember I've mentioned your EAP analysis need to inform your EE plan. Okay, we've established on junior management that the females, African females, is the highest priority. Now we're saying, okay, what if, it's not just called the what if calculator. What if in year 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5 of our EE plan, we might employ 1 African female? You can see in front of you, remains priority number 1. What if in year 2, we think we're going to employ 2 African females? Still remains priority number 1. Year 3, we say another African female. Colleagues, do you immediately see what happens to your priorities? It changes. Now your priority number 1 is a colored male. What if we employ 1 colored male? Your priority then becomes an African female. What if we employ another, let's call it 7 African females, we're growing to 14 African females. You see then your white male becomes priority number 1. Now we say we're going to employ 1 white male in year 5 of our plan. Then your colored female equals priority number 1. Okay, colleagues, the reason why I'm showing this to you is that in all the DG reviews we've been involved, let's call it the year 2020 for that matter. The question is, why did you employ in the already overrepresented race and genders? Why did you not consider whatsoever the case may be? And we've seen that throughout 2020. So please, you have to prioritize before you promote and or employ. On the EEPlan inputs on the online portal that our clients utilize, I'm not going to go extensively. I know that we are running over time. Thanks not everyone for still attending. What I'd like to show you is that, look, on this online portal, we have hundreds of examples of possible barriers. I want to show you, since the main purpose of this meeting today, webinar, was for disabilities throughout South Africa. I just want to show you what examples you will be able to use when we are talking and or referring to work environment and facilities when it comes to disabled. I'm not going to run through all of the barriers. We don't have time. I can keep you busy for another 8 hours. So just to show you an example, when you're talking about working environment and facilities, work environment and facilities, is it a barrier? Yes, we might say it's a barrier. What's the time frame? What's the affirmative action measures? After reviewing our analysis, we noted there's substantial inequality between male and female employees, barrier we experience, industry we operate in. Then you can click on that. Currently, we do not provide reasonable accommodation for people with disabilities. Okay, we will identify reasonable accommodation shortfalls. It came to our attention, not compliance with safety precautions, etc., etc. Colleagues, I'm not going to go through all of this. Like I said, there's hundreds of possible barriers that our clients utilize. If you need more information on the online portal, feel free to send me an email. We can do a demo for you and your company and your management. And as mentioned at the end of the day, we can literally get your plan into place, your analysis, your EEA2 report, your EEA4 report. We submit the reports on our clients' behalf. Basically, we become our clients' total and full EE compliance division. Okay, so just before I go to the questions, you can maybe make note of the following. If you go onto YouTube, okay, hopefully everyone knows about YouTube, you can type in the company name, EECMS. And you will see, please do me a favor, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Whenever we load a new video, you will get an email saying there's more information. We have a couple of COVID things. Next year, we are meeting with a doctorate specializing in HIV and AIDS awareness programs. We're going to invite your company to attend to that as well. Once we have done that, our production team works on it. It's placed onto YouTube. It comes at no cost, colleagues. Feel free to YouTube EECMS, subscribe to our channel, and you will have all the videos there as well. And then just to close off with, we have a functionality where you can have a look at the EE Masterclass. That comes at a cost. That is if you are interested. Your companies may be interested in either employment equity or the fundamentals of employment equity, or writing an exam on the proposed amendment bill or diversity management, or whatsoever the case may be. You can follow the prompts there. That comes at a cost. For our clients, it doesn't, but it's something that you can utilize. I'm going to play you a 1-minute video, and then I'm going to open for questions. We are open for questions. I just quickly want to check. I think they did come in a couple of things here. Okay, I've got a question here from Jana. The EEA4. Let me just open my video again on my side. Thanks a lot. Okay, question from Jana. The EEA4 does not show on the EE portal, only the EEA2. What is the possible reasons and how can this be fixed? Your EEA4 will open onto the EE portal when you have done your EEA2. If you could just give me half a second, please. Cornell, can you please confirm the following? The EEA4, does that open when you have compiled and completed the EEA2? So the answer there is correct. Jana, what you will see now, due to the fact that the Act changed, the 8th of August last year, you first need to compile your EEA2, because one of the big changes were that if you, let's say, employ 100 people as at your snapshot date in your EEA2, you have to report the exact 100 people in your EEA4. Okay, you don't include the 100 plus terminations. So you first need to complete your EEA2. I did confirm with Cornell and Dewald just now. Then it will open your EEA4 for submissions. Okay. Hopefully that answered your question there.
Hi, Pieter. Yes, I just want to say thanks. I thought that was the case. I just wasn't sure. So I thought when I'm done with it, it will show. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jana. I also do see that you have a question, textile and towels, etc. Will it fall under manufacturing or retail? Okay, depending. You will need to talk to your auditors, because it might be the manufacturing of textile, and or it might be the selling of textile products. Okay, so then it will be able to be either retail or wholesale. Retail, just give you an example. If you put in fuel at the engine garage, for that matter, it's deemed retail. If engine purchases fuel from the depot side, it will be wholesale. Okay, if you have more questions on that, Jana, feel free to pop me an email and I'll get back to you. Okay. Okay, then from Corin, what does one do if you have a disinterested and or reluctant EE committee? People who get bored, especially when discussing statistics, who do a bad job of reporting back to their constituencies. Okay, yeah, you know what, Corin, that's always difficult. We've seen that in practice as well. Where you're sitting in a scenario, okay, so number one, if an employment equity committee disrupt your EE process pertaining to compliance, that could result in you referring that employee to the Department of Employment and Labour for 30,000 rand penalty. However, we never advise that, okay, because you don't want the Employment Equity Committee members to start with that process, okay? But bottom line is the following: if you have your meeting minutes stipulating that by means of signing these meeting minutes, you agree that you will report back to your fellow colleagues that you represent, whether it's occupational levels and or race and genders, your company will be safeguarded, because then it's not your mistake. It's a mistake of the employee. It could be a slap on the wrist, maybe a written warning, and Bob's your uncle. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question. If it does not, please feel free to unmute yourself a little bit later. Then from Jabulani, I have a question. The software e-master, where can one purchase it? Okay. Everyone attending here, you can send me an email. I will send you a quotation. Please bear in mind and remember the following. It's not software per se. It's an online portal. It took us just about 5 years with a lot of developers to write this online portal. We built studios throughout South Africa. We invested a lot of time, intellectual property, and money. It's more an online portal. Okay, so in other words, it's not something that we give you a CD or a DVD or a flash drive, whatsoever. It's something that's hosted throughout the world in an online portal. Then if there are changes pertaining to the Employment Equity Act, we write new modules, we load it onto the portfolio for our clients, and the next day you will be able to comply with the amended act once it changes. Okay, so if you would like to maybe have a demo and or maybe have more information on what it entails, because it entails total and full EE compliance, send me an email and I will respond to that. The good news I have for companies as well, whatsoever the quotation is for the online portal, it's not only the online portal. ECMS becomes your EE consultants. We facilitate the meetings. We do your meeting minutes. We do your submissions. We do your EE plan in conjunction with, of course, your company's and EE committee's involvement. And at the end of the year, we even facilitate quarter 4, get approval by the relevant parties and submit on your behalf. We have these kind of sessions where we invite all our clients to as well. So if you need more information on that, whatsoever your quotation is, you are able to claim total and full BEE points under the skills development scorecard under informal training. Why? Because whatsoever your quote is, we load it onto e-masterclass, and you have the opportunity of employees enrolling into those courses, especially employees that qualify for BEE points. Those employees receive a certificate, and your company actually get your BEE points. Okay, why? Because a lot of companies would say, you know what, ECMS, we don't have budget for employment equity. But when you talk about BEE under skills development, because we train your staff, we train your committee, we train your e-manager, we facilitate everything on your behalf, and then a company says, but you know what, we have budget for BEE. Bob's your uncle, you have best of both worlds. Okay, to answer your question directly, just send me an email, and then I will send you a quote there, Jabulani. Thanks a lot for that. From Illinois, thank you very much. We'll definitely subscribe. Thanks a lot for that. Have to leave. Then from Colin, how do I address the issue during recruitment where the employer-employee from the same occupational level that complies of different levels by using internal applicants only within the underrepresented groups, thus resulting in the goals of the EEPlan not being reached and the status being unchanged with employing internal candidates? Colin, okay, to you and the remaining delegates, please bear in mind the following. The main purpose of employment equity, and any inspector will tell you this, is to try your best to, first of all, promote internally before you go externally, okay? Once you have exhausted your internal promotions, then go outside and see at the lower tiers where that person now has been promoted to the upper level. On the lower tier, then you focus on your highest underrepresented race and genders. Of course, if you then do not meet the annual objectives as set out in your EEPlan for this reporting period, you need to provide the reason as why you did not achieve. What we have seen, majority of companies, South Africa for 2020, say due to COVID-19 pandemic, we did not achieve our annual objectives as set out in this year of our EEPlan, and all due to economic circumstances, due to a recession, due to retrenchments, due to whatsoever your valid reasoning is. Just build that into your EEA2 before you submit for the 2020 reporting period. Okay, then thank you. Okay, I'm going to give the opportunity, any delegate, feel free to unmute yourself and raise your query. Anyone is more than welcome. I'm so glad 45 minutes past our runtime, we still have 56 companies involved here. So I think and do believe it went well. Colleagues, please, I'm going to kill my video. I'm here with the microphones in our studio. Any questions, please? Just unmute yourself and raise your query. Okay, everyone. If there's no more questions from our side, ECMS, again, thank you so much for your time. Have a blessed festive season. Please be safe. We will keep you posted on future events. So from our side, Pieter from ECMS, thank you very much. Be safe, and we'll talk next year. Thanks a lot, everyone.
EECMS is introducing the first virtual employment equity compliance solution by taking your consultant online. Clients are no longer required to conduct face-to-face meetings with our consultants. Our virtual solution will allow clients from around the globe to interact, consult, and train with their respective consultants from the comfort of their own desk. With our web-based compliance services, your employment equity solution submissions and consultations will stay compliant as per the requirements of the Act, no matter where you are based. No more traveling or boardroom bookings. We bring the service to your desktop. Conduct conference calls with remotely based colleagues and superiors during the consult. Share live documents or screens to all attendees and consultants for brainstorming or clarification sessions. Audio visually record meeting discussions between yourselves and the consultant for references and notes. Join the web-based consultancy services today and comply with your employment equity services from the comfort of your own desk. Speak to your consultant for more information or contact our information center for details on the services rendered. EECMS, your virtual employment equity compliance management service. EECMS utilizes an online tool to ensure full and total EE compliance as per the amended Act. We ensure that you are in full compliance with the Employment Equity Act. We do it all. You just need to connect with us as we aim to become your go-to guy. We meet and consult via our virtual solutions. We implement the Act, and you achieve compliance. Employers with over 50 employees. Agriculture over 6 million turnover, mining over 22.5 million turnover, manufacturing over 30 million turnover, electricity, gas and water over 30 million turnover, construction over 15 million turnover, retail and motor over 45 million turnover and more. Eliminate penalties. Increase a triple BEE score, forming a sense of belonging to employees. Effective transformation. And promoting diversity. We submit the EEA2 and EEA4 reports on behalf of our clients, after approval thereof by the CEO or accounting officer. EECMS has a Level 4 broad-based Black Economic Empowerment rating. Our clients therefore qualify for 100% recognition when procuring from us. Our CEO has been involved in various marketing and communication entities. We have various EE specialists, including a compliance auditor with 3 years' experience at one of the Big 4 auditing firms. Our team has been involved in 62 DG reviews from 2017 to September 2019, with a 100% pass rate of companies not being referred to the Labour Court. Submissions of reports are done by a number of experienced data capturers, and we have a staff complement to ensure the successful submissions of all our clients. We currently serve more than 160 companies who employ anything between 6 to 12,500 employees. Our client base includes private companies, listed companies, close corporations, non-profit organizations, educational institutions, and government. Clients' annual turnover ranges from very little to more than 1 billion rand, and we have a client base throughout South Africa. EECMS, your virtual employment equity compliance management service.